Thank you, Dr. Price. We appreciate it. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself too.
Okay. My name is Melissa Price. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I've been working on Pueo for the last 4 years in my lab. And the projects are continuing to expand. So I'm excited to tell you a bit about Pueo today. And we're discovering more every year. So hopefully in future years, we'll have more to share. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to think about with you is, when should we worry that a species might be endangered? So Pueo are a raptor, and so they're at the top of the food web, and we expect things that are at the top of the food web to be present in lower numbers than other things. So for example, we expect to see, a lot of plants on the landscape, maybe a lot of insects, maybe a lot of birds or even rodents now. And then things that that eat at the top of the food web are typically in lower abundance. So how can you tell whether it's naturally at a low abundance or whether it's something we should worry about? So there's kind of 4 hallmarks that we look for. Are the numbers declining? Are they at low numbers? Are they not fulfilling their function or ecological role? So this could be, depending on the species, something like pollination or predation or seed dispersal. And a lot of times something goes functionally extinct before it's actually it disappeared from the landscape. And we also might see things like inbreeding or high mortality for unexpected or unexplained reasons, or a high rate of reproductive failure. So all of these things could tell us that a species might be endangered, or we might need to worry. Pueo are particularly important to a lot of people. Usually when I give a talk about Pueo, I like to start off by just asking people to share their stories about Pueo, because many people in the islands have had a personal experience or a personal encounter with Pueo, or they may even consider themselves in pilina or in relationship with Pueo. One form of that relationship that it could take is a form of an aumakua. This is a concept of like an incarnation of an ancestor that could manifest through animals to intervene or save their descendants from harm. They could pass a message or information. It doesn't have to be an animal, it could be any type of object. So for a lot of people, it's more than just, I like seeing this owl. They actually often experience a relationship with Pueo. They also show up in mo'olelo, or tradition, or stories. So for example, the Battle of Kukeu Nahio Ka Pueo, the confused noise of owls rising in masses, is a relatively commonly known story about Pueo. There are 3 raptors that you're most commonly going to see in the islands. So there's one group that you're not going to see anymore, the Galistrix genus. Those are stilt owls that are now extinct. There's the Pueo, or short-eared owl, Acioflamia sandwichensis, and this actually is a globally distributed species. So short-eared owls, and I was kind of surprised to hear this. If you're not a birder, then especially one who's traveled quite a bit, then this might be surprising to you how unusual it is to have a truly globally distributed species like this. So short-eared owls, if you travel in North America, South America, Central America, Galapagos Islands, Europe, even in Africa, you may come across a short-eared owl. So these are a truly globally distributed species, and they're thought to be declining globally, unfortunately, due to a variety of reasons. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. So we have a subspecies of it in our islands here. And this is our only widespread native raptor. So the eo, or Hawaiian hawk, is also found on the Big Island of Hawaii, but the short-eared owl, the Hawaiian short-eared owl, is the only one that occurs on every single island. We also now have the barn owl, which was introduced, and it's invasive to the islands. Earlier, there was a little bit of talk about the difference between non-native and invasive. So barn owls do actually cause problems for our native species. They eat seabirds, our forest birds, other endangered birds. So they do cause impacts as a non-native species, so we consider them invasive. The Pueo occur from sea level up to 3,000 meters in elevation. So you might see them almost anywhere, which makes them a very interesting challenge to study because they're found in all different kinds of habitats. The diet includes small mammals, birds, and insects. They're a true generalist. So on the mainland and on many continental systems, they're known as being a rodent specialist. So eating small mice or voles. But in the islands, even though they do have mice and sometimes rats as a major part of their diet, they also eat quite a few birds. They eat a lot of invertebrates. So for example, there's a Pueo that was in rehab. It had been struck by a car. It's blind in one eye, and they observed it quite often going after cockroaches in the bottom of the area it was being kept. And this is something we've also observed in our studies. We were tracking a Pueo on the west side of Oahu, and it actually would hang out on the beach at a beach park behind the dumpster, grabbing moths out of the air and cockroaches there. So they definitely do have invertebrates as part of their diet as well. So they're generalists as far as their diet. They can eat a lot of different things. And as I mentioned, they occupy a variety of habitats. They're found in our wet and dry forests, grasslands, shrublands, montane parklands, potentially because they really don't have much competition other than barn owls in the islands. And so they can utilize a lot of these different habitats. They have lots of potential food sources. For example, we see them quite a few times in wetlands. My lab has studies taking place on water birds as well. We've had studies of IO, or the Hawaiian stilt, where we have cameras on nests to capture the nesting behavior and look at potential impacts to our water birds from predators and other impacts to nesting success. And we've observed Pueo eating not only eggs and chicks, but also we found a pair of adult legs in a Pueo roost. So they even will predate on the IO adults. So they eat our native and invasive species. They occur in a wide variety of habitats, but we do predominantly see them in open habitats where it's much easier energetically for them to capture the food items that are there. Breeding habitat varies as well. They're a ground nesting bird, and on the mainland, they're thought to be grassland specialists and in continental systems. But in Hawaii, we've seen them in a huge variety of habitats. Yes, the grasslands. So they form these open cup nests. If you think you found a Pueo nest, please do report it to our website, pueoproject.com. And you could also report it to Division of Forestry and Wildlife, who can keep an eye on it. We encourage you not to approach the nest because it can cause nest abandonment. So it's best if you accidentally flush a Pueo off the nest, please carefully back away and then stay away from the area so you don't attract predators or otherwise disturb the adult in the nest area. So this is a grassland nest, but we also have observed them in wetland areas where we're studying the stilts, in the middle of pickleweeds sometimes, and we've even had a report of a nest in a luhe in high elevation native forest. So they truly can use a variety of nesting habitats. And we don't think they're necessarily limited by that, but probably by the predators that impact their nesting success. So why are they state listed as endangered on Oahu? Well, the limitations on Oahu probably have to do with habitat degradation. So there's obviously a lot of roadways and a lot of mortality. My lab has accumulated we collected all of the data from across the islands that we could get our hands on for the last 30 years of causes of mortality. So any record of mortality in Pueo, we pulled together. We got rid of any duplicate records, that kind of thing. And out of 105 records from across the state over those 30 years, a large portion of them were caused by car strikes. So Pueo like to do hunting along the roadway. It's open, you might get rodents running across the road, so it's great habitat for them to hunt in. But they often, after they catch a prey item, will land and eat the prey item very close to where they caught it, rather than carrying it somewhere else and risking being bit or accidentally dropping it or getting it stolen by a competitor. And so They, unfortunately, if they land on the road, they often get hit by cars. So you may have seen that as you're driving around. You may see the carcass of a Pueo that's been struck by a car. Other impacts could include, for example, rodenticide. And rodenticide is something that every organization in Hawaii uses across the landscape. It's used by natural resource managers, it's used by agricultural users, it's used by personal homeowners. And a USDA study, not associated with our lab, that was carried out over the last couple of years and looked at Pueo as well as barn owls and other species, detected rodenticide in blood samples from every single raptor that they tested. So it is something that's potentially impacting our Pueo. We won't know to what degree it's impacting them until we're able to do further study to see the levels and whether those levels could be causing problems. And predation is definitely a problem, potentially in, particularly when nesting. We've also noticed in our studies that Pueo hang out on the ground a lot, actually. So they'll just sit on the ground for hours. In one set of focal studies we were doing, where we were, I'll show you the data in a little bit, we were trying to figure out their activity patterns throughout the day. So when are they most active? And a person in my lab was sitting there watching them. They literally could watch them for 6 hours, and maybe once an hour, the Pueo would fly up in the air, do a little turn, and come back down, and then just hang out on the ground, doing what appeared to be nothing. And in the evening, then they'd often pick up and fly off and go hunting for the night. But they often would just sit on the ground. So they're vulnerable to predators. Their nests, as ground nests, are vulnerable to predators, both cats and mongoose. So if you want to be able to tell a Pueo versus a barn owl apart, they can be distinguished by their appearance as well as by their hunting behavior. So Pueo are much more dark and streaky, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. They've got those little bars across the top of their wing, if you're so lucky as to be able to see that. And they have kind of this outline to the face, but much darker. They're very expressive too. If you've gotten to observe one in the wild, sometimes you can feel like they are glaring at you. They're giving you stink eye. So they're very expressive, and you can usually tell whether they're having a resting face or a hunting face by the pose of their face. The barn owls, in contrast, are much lighter in color, so very white, and that heart-shaped face. So once you kind of spend enough time looking at different photos that are available on the internet, or on our Pueo Project website, you can kind of get a feel for the difference between them, and probably have a good feel for whether you're seeing one or the other if you get a quick glance at it in the field. Do be careful though at sunset, right as it's getting dark, when they're, at least on Oahu, getting a lot more active. Even really trained ornithologists sometimes, if someone comes cruising in, you may have a difficult time even distinguishing between that and an auku'u, because that size and the shape as they come cruising in, without good lighting, you sometimes can't tell the difference, surprisingly. The other way we often tell the difference between birds is by sound, as you saw earlier in this presentation. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. First of all, the Pueo. And just double checking with the host, are you able to hear this okay, the sound?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, second Pueo call. And that's what we would describe as a bark. And then for the barn owl, very different. And one more of the barn owl. So as my former postdoc would say, the Pueo sounds like you expect an owl to sound, with that hooting noise. The barn owl kind of sounds like a ghost. So pretty easy to distinguish in the field between the two. So our lab's been working on a few different things. One is developing a standardized survey and monitoring protocol for Pueo. One really surprising thing for a statewide distributed raptor, our only native raptor that's distributed on every single island. is that we've never done a statewide status assessment of Pueo. As far as I can tell from talking with a lot of natural resource managers and ornithologists. And if we want to be able to figure out whether we're in danger of losing our Pueo, we really have to start with doing statewide standardized monitoring for this species. So we've developed a standardized survey technique, which we've implemented on a couple of islands now, but we just have 1 year of data for each of those islands, and we're working on building that up so we can look at patterns over time. We've also looked at distribution among different vegetation types. As I told you earlier, I mean, they can be almost anywhere across our islands. And so that makes them both very interesting to study and very challenging, as opposed to a species with a very narrow range that you know exactly where to go and you see it every time. We're working on estimating population size, but again, with a really low abundant species, that can be very challenging. And we're working on gathering information on breeding and foraging behavior. So we're continuing to collect data on nest site selection as they're discovered, to figure out how they're selecting for optimal habitat type for breeding. And then we're also evaluating foraging behavior. So I have a graduate student who just finished doing an island-wide study on Maui looking at all potential food types for the Pueo. So this was an absolutely ambitious study in which across all these different sites, she evaluated invertebrate abundance, rodent abundance, and potential bird prey abundance, as well as the Pueo abundance on the landscape. So really great study that was a lot of fun. So a little bit of results, particularly for those of you who are tour operators and may want to know when am I most likely to see a Pueo. So across the top, you can see the distribution of our time spent in the field. So about 26% in the morning, 48% midday, you know, across that span, and then 26% in the evening. So approximately equal distribution across time. And yet, the distribution of Pueo detections was not equal. So 61% of detections of Pueo were in the evening hours, 30% were in the morning hours, and only 9% of Pueo minutes where we actually observed Pueo were in the middle of the day. So this likely is different among islands. And so we're continuing to expand these studies on different islands as we move among places and collect data. But at least on Oahu, this was the distribution of daily activity. The other thing that's really interesting for you to look for, and that we would be very interested in you reporting to the Pueo Project website, is courtship behavior. So Pueo do this really cool display flight, and if you are lucky, you've maybe seen this in the field. So you'll see on the left here, so in the center you've got like an observer female, and then on the left you've got that male that it'll do kind of these circles into the air, and then it'll do a wing clapping display and then go down, and then do another wing clapping display and then come down. So I'll show you that here. I'll play it a couple of times. It's real quick. Okay, one more time. Okay, so I mean, it happens really fast. If you're not looking for it, you might miss it, but it is going to take place during the day. Obviously, it's a visual display, so it wouldn't be possible to see it at night, either for the female that it's intended for or for you. So lucky you, they're going to be doing it during the day when you can see it. As far as courtship displays, among the different observations, we saw them mostly in October through June. So we did not see any courtship displays in July, August, or September. So there may be a slight lull in the season there. The bulk of the courtship activity was taking place in February, March, and April, with chicks and owlets usually observed in April, May, and June. So please keep an eye open for these displays. Let us know if you see them. We'd love to continue expanding on our knowledge of the breeding season, because it's so much expanded compared to what we see in continental systems. And so it makes Hawaii very unique. We think this is actually more common among tropical and subtropical island populations, in which they're also they have higher site fidelity. So in the mainland and continental systems, they're considered vagrant. They maybe nest in a place once, they're never seen there again. They may have a colonial group of individuals nesting, for example, up in Alaska or Canada, and then those individuals may fly down to California for the winter and then go back up and nest in a different location the next year or choose not to nest. But in Hawaii, we're seeing that they kind of stay within the same 10-mile radius. They may have forays out beyond that, but they stay in a pretty tight area, and they definitely seem to set up kind of year-round territories. They only defend them during the breeding season, but they hang out in that area year-round, which is really unique compared to the global population. So if we go back to that initial set of questions, are the numbers declining? Well, citizen science reports indicate declining numbers, so many people feel that they've been declining over time. Unfortunately, baseline standardized surveys haven't been done, and so the data we would need to take to authorities to make like a standard assessment of these species have not been done. So statewide surveys are needed. They would need to be simultaneous among islands because these birds do fly between islands. Are the numbers low? Well, the surveys that we conducted and the densities that we identified compared to global populations, they're actually very similar in density to global populations. However, we would expect those populations to be higher since there's so little competition. So again, without long-term data looking at trends, we're not able to say whether they are low compared to historical numbers or not. Are they fulfilling their ecological role? Well, they're definitely eating mice and birds and invertebrates and the things that they do as part of their top-down regulatory mechanism in their ecosystem role. We have ongoing studies about how effective they are, for example, as biocontrol on agricultural lands. So you could reduce your use of pesticide or rodenticide if you have a lot of Pueo on your property because they're filling that role for you. And finally, we're also continuing to evaluate mortality and breeding success. Whenever you're trying to conserve an endangered species, you're interested in two things. What's the plus and what's the minus? So what are the things that are killing them and how can we mitigate for that? What are the things that could help grow their numbers and how can we protect them during those critical times? And so we have ongoing studies to evaluate that. So with that, I want to thank the huge number of people who have helped out on these studies so far, both in funding the various studies. We've had funding that allows us to partner with people on agricultural lands and look at Pueo as potential for biocontrol on those habitats, as well as studies on military lands, which provide habitat for them as well, and then with the state and on the state and federal lands. So because these species occur across all different kinds of properties, we have to be partnering with all different partners to be conserving Pueo. So we're so thankful for all the people who have helped out with that, as well as volunteers, grad students, undergraduate students, postdocs, and others who have helped out over the last 4 years. And with that, thank you so much. You can report any sightings of Pueo on pueoproject.com. It's really helpful to us if you're able to report things like the coloration of the owl, so we can confirm it was a Pueo and not a barn owl, although we're interested in barn owl distribution as well to look at the relative distribution of the two. And particularly if you observe courtship displays or think you found a nest, we're very interested in those reports as well, remembering that you should not approach the nest because you may cause nest abandonment. So with that, I can take any questions on this.
Hi, Melissa. There's a couple questions. How long do the chicks gestate? And which months are we more likely to see the new babies?
Yeah, so it's over a few weeks, and then like I said, the highest number of when we've been most likely to see the chicks or the owlets have been, I think we've seen them as early as like late March, early April, and we've seen them as late as July. So that's probably when you're most likely to see the owlets. They also go through what's called a branching phase. So for example, a friend of mine mentioned having seen a Pueo owlet as they were beginning a hike, and they didn't see an adult around, and they were very concerned it had been abandoned, and they took it into Feather and Fur, one of the veterinary clinics, and they were informed, hey, they go through a branching phase, the adult was going to come back, you just needed to leave it alone. And so just for people to keep in mind, best thing is hands off if you do see them.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of times you just see a young one on the ground and people think that they need to move it, but it's probably where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. Do you want to go through the questions, or what's the easiest thing?
I can read them out to you. So how
Sure.
did barn owls arrive?
Barn owls were introduced as part of agricultural biocontrol efforts. So they were introduced to help control rodents to the islands around, I believe, 1959, if I remember correctly.
Okay, this is a good one. Have the windmills had any effect on them? And also, how big are the eggs?
Okay, so the eggs, let's see here. Yeah, we didn't have a coin in that picture for you to see the relative size. I can go back and show you the nest so you can get a feel for it. I will say from the pictures, it's maybe a little bit hard to tell. Like, for example, we've gotten a report of a Pueo nest on the west side before. When we went out and checked it out, it was another species, you know, one of our game birds. It looks similar as little white eggs, but they're different size. And without getting too close, if it were a Pueo nest, you can't tell the difference. So they're small and white, but I don't know that you personally would be able to, we wouldn't advise getting close enough to distinguish between that and another type of game species. Let's see here. And what was the other question again? Oh, the wind farm impacts?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when the student looked across all reports of mortality, there were a couple reports of Pueo found on wind farms. In a couple of those cases, they were under the turbines, and in another case, it was on the property, but we couldn't tell from the report whether it was under the turbine or not. So just like any other flying thing, they can be impacted by wind farms. So it's important that they're surveyed for along with other things. They're pretty large compared to, for example, bats, which they're supposed to be surveying for anyways. So they should be discovered when they do their surveys and I believe reported on in the publicly available reports.
I had a question about the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah.
I had heard from friends who work up there that Pueo are also seen up there, but they might not be the ones that we see here in the main Hawaiian Islands.
That's a really good question. So we have a study we're hoping to do within the next few years that would be doing the genetics to see what the relationship is between the owls in the main Hawaiian Islands and those in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They're thought to be different. So the ones in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands are thought to be vagrant from continental systems versus the ones in the islands here that are resident. So that's what I've been told, but we're wanting to follow up with genetics to evaluate that.
Awesome. And then there's a Facebook question. Have any surveys been conducted on Kuakala GMA on Oahu?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to remember if there was actually a survey site at that location. I don't think, because we randomly selected our survey points on lands we had access to. So because that's state lands, the GMA is state lands, we would have had access to it, but I don't remember if a point randomly landed within it for survey. And so, yeah, I don't know for sure if we've done studies at that site. It certainly would be within the potential home range of the birds that we tracked for about a year. So those were with VHF transmitters, which eventually the battery dies and they quit emitting. We're moving toward GPS transmitters that are solar recharged and will give us more long-term data, even though you don't have eyes on them. So it's a different type of data. You can get the location, but you don't know what they're doing at that location. So yeah, advantages and disadvantages to each.
I think that's all the questions I see.
Okay.
Mm,
So,
else?
yeah, so you had told me that if people wanted to hear about, let's see here. Yeah, so there's a few comments. Everyone has a Pueo story, and I love hearing them. So one of the things we're moving into with my lab that I'm really excited about, I work on a lot of species, water birds, kohuli or Hawaiian tree snails. We do ungulate distribution. We've developed ungulate distribution models, which is one of the things I was maybe going to show you if there was time from Maui, because we've done the distribution models for pigs, goats, and deer for Maui. So I work on a lot of different species and a lot of ones that people could potentially have relationship or had relationship with in the past. For example, kohuli or Hawaiian tree snails were very important to a lot of people in the past. They felt relationship with them, or there's a lot of stories with them included that they're associated with romance, or when all is right in the world again, the tree snails sing. But today's no one gets to interact with them, or so few people get to, that they don't have living culture or living relationship with them. And Pueo are absolutely amazing in that they're part of living culture. People have relationship with them today in a way that we're rarely able to with so many of our other native species. If you're not a tour operator who gets to regularly go into these spaces, or a conservation professional, or state or federal professional who gets to interact with them. And so anyways, I have a student coming in the fall who's part of her study is going to be looking at the living culture versus going into the Hawaiian newspapers and looking at the historical culture and kind of that living aspect of culture, of what were they in the past to people and what are they today to people. So we're really excited to look more deeply into that.
That's awesome. Are there any like websites, or like, I know that students have to usually do a dissertation or a presentation. Is there any like resources like that that you might be able to share with everybody?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we started working on Pueo in 2017. Our first publication, it's in revisions right now, so it's not out yet. And hopefully we can have it accepted for publication and put it out for a while. The state reports that we've submitted are publicly available on the DOPA website, and we also link them on my lab website, I believe, and definitely on the Pueo website as a resource. We try to make sure as we discover things that we make them publicly available, either through presentations or reports or that kind of thing, so people can be making decisions based on the information as quickly as possible and not just waiting for a publication to come out. So we'll definitely make information available as we discover it, but we're still in the process of, for example, the student that did the Maui-wide prey distribution studies, she's in the process of writing things up and will defend her thesis hopefully at the end of the summer. And so once that's, it's not even in a form that could be shared yet other than the presentation she's given in the past. So anyways, yeah, my lab's still relatively in the baby stages. I just started officially in my tenure track position in 2017. So still working on getting a lot of things into the public sphere, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and
Thank
sharing
you.
all this great information.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, so I guess since it's 2:40, maybe we'll kind of wrap things up. There's still a couple of comments of like Pueo stories and such. I'll let you look at those in the chat. All right, so our kind of final presentation is kind of something that everybody always asks questions about, like what can we do to help? And I think you've kind of gotten a little bit of that throughout this presentation. See, this taking a second for this to load up. There we go. So Alyssa talked about, reporting invasive species and using that 643 PEST website and phone number. And then she also talked about learning about rapid ohia death, rapidohiadeath.org, and preventing movement of ohia, cleaning off your gear, and spraying alcohol on your boots and tools and such. And then, in a lot of the tours, I feel like companies are starting to look at responsible, eco-friendly materials. Like a lot of the tour boats have now, reef-friendly sunscreen, reusable eating utensils, and reusable plates and such. Styrofoam is getting banned. We're trying to reduce the plastic, toss away kind of stuff that, I think individually and as companies that we can all do. See, we had a presenter talk about eco-friendly car washes and soaps and things, proper chemical disposal, because there's runoff, and anything that you're using on the land is likely to end up in the ocean. We talked about reducing mosquito habitat. You can clean out your gutters, get rid of old tires, dump out all those wheelbarrows and buckets and flip them over so they don't get full of water. There's a hot topic on Maui right now with feral cats, and we as conservation organizations don't think that people should be feeding feral cats or supporting feral cat colonies, since they contribute to killing wildlife and spreading diseases, even to marine mammals like our Hawaiian monk seals. So there's lots of organizations to become involved with. There's a great website called conservationconnections.org that has a lot of volunteer opportunities. All of our individual websites have that as well. A lot of our fundraisers and events and hikes and volunteer opportunities are on hold right now, but keep us in mind in the future. There's our mauimauka.org/volunteer website. And I know some organizations are transitioning to kind of like getting people to do remote work. Like I know the Coral Reef Alliance was asking volunteers to help them grow plants at home for them. So I think there are different ways that people can get involved with organizations right now, even at their homes. And there's lots of resources to always look into further, learning about native plants and invasive species. And we talked about some of the bird resources. So yeah, we appreciate you guys listening for 3 hours. And we appreciate you supporting environmental education and legislation, such as the current legislation that's going on today with not feeding feral cats and other feral animals. Feral meaning wild, nobody's pets. And then share what you learned. I know it's kind of complicated to take all this information and try to get it into your, either your classrooms or your homes or, your tours. Since everybody has a little bit more time, we're always welcome to hear ideas of how you can incorporate this. I know, some companies carry the infographics with them, or they, have EV plushies with them, or video or something to try to incorporate this information so that, tourists or even people who live here or going on those tours can learn more about our native species and preventing the spread of invasive species. So yeah, that's it for me. Allison, do you want to have any closing remarks?
No, just that if you enjoyed what you heard today, we do take donations. So you can go to our website, and that helps support this program as we try to reach out and get to more tourists or people that are interested. We definitely appreciate that. So, and then we did post also that post survey. So again, in the beginning, we talked about that survey you take in the beginning. It's the same questions at the end, and see if you have all the answers now. You should. But please follow the link in the chat to go to that survey, I suggest you do it now, because we all know that we get busy, and we're going to send it in the follow-up email, but you might forget all the great things you learned by then. So please click on that link, work on that post survey as soon as we're done here or right now. That would be appreciative and helpful. And I think that's kind of what I've got. I want to thank everybody for joining us today in our new format of online and Facebook sharing and everything else we're all learning how to do right now. So thank you guys.
Yeah, I was just going to make a plug for our Facebook page. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we'll be able to review the presentation. So if there's anything you missed, or you want to review something that Dr. Price covered, you can go to our Facebook page and check it out there. And we'll share the links as well that we covered in our discussion. We can put some of those on the Facebook page as well. So yeah, check that out. It's also a great way to just find out about new trainings, new topics, conservation issues going on Maui. But yeah, thank you guys for all of your patience.
Yeah, so you, for those that did sign up, we have your email. Expect the email next week with a lot of the links, and then hopefully a link to the recording to this training as well. And there was one more thing, but I can't remember it. But yeah, and then if you want a certificate of completion, as a reminder, just email us back and let us know, or contact us through the website, mauimaka.org, or info@mauimaka.org, and let us know if you wanted that as well. So I think that wraps it up, unless anybody has any last minute questions for any of us. And I want to thank Melissa for joining us today, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And we'll sign off and wish you all a wonderful evening and a good weekend, holiday weekend, right? This is always the awkward part of the of the training, where we all just trying to wrap things up. So I guess if we're all ready, we can end the meeting and go from there.
Someone wants to be admitted.
Oh, really? Tell them they can watch it on Facebook later.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Aloha.
Yeah.
Aloha.
Bye.
Okay, live stream has ended.